Hi, I'm Rachel, and this is my Friday Reads video for August 10th, 2018. The last time I updated with an Am reading sort of update was in July, and since then I've finished all my July reading, and I put up my July newsletter, which I'll link to below, my July literary newsletter, where I put in snippets of my Goodreads reviews and point out literary stories that are of interest to me, and I put in a book pic from my Bookstagram, and I do a book meme, and so on. So anyway, it's all down there, and I won't focus too much on the books because you can also get to the reviews down there. When last I was in front of this camera, I believe I was about to start reading The Worlds We Think We Know by Dalia Rosenfeld, which is a short story collection mostly about Jews either in Ohio or Jerusalem, or something like that. And it turned out to be the last short story collection that I read in July. I kind of wanted to set aside July to be a short story heavy month. It's my birthday month, and I hadn't read many collections yet in the year. I only ended up reading 3 short story collections out of the 8 books I read last month, and I think this one was my least favorite. I think there was just something ungrounded about the stories. It's just a little too magic realism-y, I guess. And one I really liked was a stream of consciousness story about a man who got mugged on the streets of New York, and he was desperate to, you know, get every detail right in his head and about what happened to him, like to write down the sensations of being mugged, and then his thoughts turned to a bad relationship that he had recently got out of, and I just liked the ebb and flow of that one. So that one stuck out to me. And then I listened to my first audiobook in a while. It's A Torch Against the Night by Sabaa Tahir, which finally got to me in the library overdrive, and I was so excited. It's the 3rd in her Ember in the Ashes series, and I think it's my favorite YA fantasy series out right now, and this installment did not disappoint. I don't think I loved it as much as the 2nd installment, because that one was particularly soul-crushing. Apparently that's what I like. It did amazing things for one of the characters in particular, and you know, that can't be repeated for the character. It's better to go forward rather than to try to repeat. But anyway, Tahir kept the drama and suspense up, and all of the characters had their plots and their counterplots, and they all seem very true to form, and there is certainly a bigger infusion of magic in this book, because we have to get the magic subplot off the ground, I guess, before the finale and the final, which will be coming out next year, I believe. So yeah, I mean, I'd certainly suggest reading the first 2 books first. But it deals with all those intriguing questions like oppression and revenge, and beliefs and relationships are challenged if they were good to begin with. And there's love and romance. It's you know, the typical YA type of romance, but the rest of it I really tend to like, and I've been listening to it on audiobook, and the way that the audiobook narrators are doing the voices, especially for the magical creatures, it's starting to get really freaky. So I'm really enjoying it. That was definitely one of my favorite reads of the month. And finally, I read this book. This is Jews on the Frontier, Religion and Mobility in 19th Century America by Shari Rabin. And I just talked about this at length in my Sammy Rohr video that I put up earlier this week. It took me a long time to get that video up and running, so I'm pretty happy with the results. I think I did pretty well. But anyway, what really stuck out to me in this nonfiction book about Jewish America, because I've been reading a fair few of them this year, and they roll over the same you know, territory over and over again, and this one certainly did as well. But her thesis centered so much on mobility and how that changed things for Jews and Jewish immigrants, really, because you know, they were coming from Europe, where among other ways of persecution, they weren't allowed to move around much. There were quotas and fines and harassment that were, you know, placed on these people to keep them in place. And America was the first place, really, where the country was open to them, wide open to them. And it was also during the time of Manifest Destiny, when the powers that be wanted to progress the narrative of having white people settling the land, and so Jews were classified as white and had this freedom that they've never had before. And so we have this very interesting place in history. And then, of course, there's also the deal of how, because there's no state-sponsored religion, that Jews have to think out religious boundaries for themselves in this new territory, especially when there might not be that many Jews where they are. So there's a envelope-pushing part of Judaism that is inherent to American Judaism too, where they have to test the boundaries. So I like this. Now on to my August books. The first book I finished in August was this one. This is another short story collection. I didn't want to completely leave it behind. This is Eastern Shore Shorts. That was get the she sells by the, oh my god, I can't do it. But anyway, these are short stories that are set on the eastern shore of Maryland. It's where I went to college, and I also set a fictional town for my novella in that area, so I thought this might be fun research. It's done by a small local press. I always like supporting the little guy. And in terms of the research or the nostalgic fuzzy feels about, you know, the eastern shore of Maryland, it was spot on. And I also liked the interconnectivity between the stories about how old characters would crop up in news stories, or not the characters themselves, but they'd be related to people in the news stories. So that was pretty fun. And we even had sort of a thorough way through the stories where they were all leading up to the final story, which was a wedding. But that being said, these stories at best are very workmanlike, and at worst the characters all sound the same, and the author is just sort of telling us what's happening and setting up resolutions that go way too quickly and are way too pat. And I know these are fluffy reads. They're all romances, and they're not supposed to be deep and too deep or anything, but it was a little too shallow in the waters, especially with the first story, which was the type of story that could only happen in a romance novel conceit. It's about these two people that have been in love with each other for 10 years, even though they hadn't seen each other in any of the 10 years, and hadn't even thought to look each other up for the past 10 years, despite the fact that they're both millennials, and, you know, there's something called Facebook. I just really couldn't take this story seriously at all, and then the ending was even more ridiculous. So she started off on a low note, but the rest were better, so I'll give her that. I also finished my first audiobook this month, you know, another case of came to the overdrive library hold, so got to listening to it. And it is OBSIDIO by Kristoff and Amie Kaufman, which is the third novel in their YA sci-fi epic series, the Illuminae Files. And, you know, the stories themselves are, you know, pretty, you know, mediocre, badass teens, you know, save the world from evil corporations sort of stuff. But listening to them on audio is just such an experience because they have a full cast. It's like a radio show with all of the sci-fi extras. That being said, I think this one didn't stick out to me as much as the other two, maybe because all of the special effects stuff had been said and done before, and there wasn't anything particularly to set this one apart. And so the other story elements kind of got to me more, you know, the pat endings and, you know, how, you know, people are in danger, but it's really just like, you know, a trick and that sort of thing. And also this installment followed two storylines, whereas the other ones only followed one at a time. And so maybe they were biting off more than they could chew. And you could tell that they were trying to probe deep things going on, like we have artificial intelligence going mad and also falling in love with a lady, and also differing alliances when things are under fire. And they try to get across the point that in situations where things are tense and death is imminent and that sort of thing, people who disagree all have valid points of view, and not everybody's the bad guy, although there definitely is a big baddie in this one. But I don't know, I guess I just wasn't feeling as generous. I don't think they necessarily pulled it off as easily. It, you know, it was, you know, it's a fun adventure romp. It's not, you know, I don't think it does very well at probing the deeper ideas. That being said, something that really did amuse me in this one particularly, I think, and it's been in the other ones too, has to do with the fact that these stories are told in found document form, and we have the badass teens who are like geniuses in certain areas. They take on various like computing tasks and so forth, and they're like emailing and corresponding with their top officers about what's going wrong on the ship or the space station or what have you. And so in that way, it's almost like this novel is a workplace drama, just with really high stakes, but some of these emails going back and forth are, please listen to me about this important thing. And, you know, and the email would end with their sign off and their job title, and there'd be other emails about your meeting has been pushed back. So that part felt like really like relatable. So there's that. So I'm really glad that I listened to this series. It was fun and escapist, nothing, you know, life-shattering, but it made me excited for Sci-Fi September, where hopefully I'll be reading other space dramas, but maybe with a little more heft to them. And finally, I just started this one today. This is The Immortalists by Chloe Benjamin, and it just came out earlier this year. And in fact, this is a copy that I got signed a few months ago at a book event, and I wrote about it in one of my blogs, so I'll link that down below. I'm reading it now particularly because it's my next book club pick, and in fact, I let people know that I own the book, and because there's such a backlog on the library copies, I might have to loan it out to people when I finish. So hopefully I can get a move on that. Anyway, I'll read from the flap to let you know what it's about. In 1969, in New York City's Lower East Side, a word has spread of the arrival of a mystical woman, a traveling psychic who claims to be able to tell anyone the day they will die. The Gold Children, 4 adolescents on the cusp of self-awareness, sneak out to hear their fortunes. The prophecies inform their next 5 decades. Golden Boy Simon escapes to the West Coast, searching for love in 80s San Francisco. Dreamy Clara becomes a Las Vegas magician, obsessed with blurring reality and fantasy. Eldest son Daniel struggles to maintain security as an army doctor post 9/11. And bookish Varya throws herself into longevity research, where she tests the boundary between science and immortality. Both a dazzling family love story and a sweeping novel of remarkable ambition and depth, The Immortalists probes the line between destiny and choice, reality and illusion, this world and the next. It is a deeply moving testament to the power of story, the nature of belief, and the unrelenting pull of family bonds. I'm only a chapter or so into this so far. I'm liking it enough so far, and hopefully it'll keep that up. So that about covers it for me now. I feel like I've been reading a whole lot lately, and that makes me happy. But as usual, I have an ambitious TBR, and who knows if I'll get to all of it in August or not. Especially since I have other things I want to do. I really want to get a jump start on the next revision of my novella. That's actually why I read those Eastern Shore short stories. I'm like, well, that'll be my jump start to get back into revision. And of course, there's other stuff that's always going on in life, like having to go to work. But we'll see how it goes. Hopefully I'll have a productive weekend, and I hope you do too. Thanks so much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.